Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Hello and welcome everyone to We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For. I'm your hostess Eilish Diavalon, and with me I'm very privileged to have Rak Razam again. We interviewed Rak back in February, and this morning we're going to be talking about your brand new documentary series called Shamans of the Global Village.
Shamans of the Global Village, as I like to say. Yes, it is. Thank you. It's a new documentary series that's available online at shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. And my co-creator and director, Niles Heckman, and I have been gestating this one for a while. It's sort of the culmination of both our life's work, working in media. Niles has been working in Hollywood on many different films. He has amazing cinematography and direction he brings to the show. I've been working in the shamanic arena as an author, a journalist, and a filmmaker for over a decade now. And we've been pooling our skill base and our passion into this show to document the global shamanic resurgence around the world, and especially the lineage between the planet, which secretes many different psychoactive substances, which I believe are there to help bring us back into right relationship with the earth itself and the rhythms of nature, and to bring us back into the web of life and to understand our place in the web of life as a whole, not as sort of the driving egoic force, but as part of what many indigenous cultures have different words for, whether it's Great Spirit or Mitakuye or Wankantanka, Great Spirit. There's all these different understandings of the fact that humans have a place in it. And shamanism as an art form and as a modality, I think, is not just healing individuals, it's bringing them back into right relationship. And so all across the planet, there's these substances which we can partake of to bring us back into this relationship with nature, to re-enchant us. And we're interested in documenting the connection between the planet, the plants, and other earth sacraments, and the people. And so indigenous cultures have been caretakers of these substances for millennia, and now Westerners are coming back into the fold, and there's a lineage developing, and the show is really interested in documenting and showcasing that journey.
And so the first episode you launched in London just recently, right?
Yeah, we're very, very privileged to launch our show. Episode 1 features Dr. Octavio Rettig, who works with the Sonoran Desert Toad. He's a Mexican, I call him a shaman. I don't know if he, in fact, calls himself a shaman. So part of what the show is looking at is what is the archetype of the shaman, which is in itself a Western conceit. It was invented essentially by anthropologists in the 20th century, and it comes from the root word shaman in Siberia, which was a medicine person. But medicine people all across the world don't necessarily call themselves shamans. They're medicine people, and they have their own words for it. So Dr. Octavio Rettig was a Mexican doctor who began working with the Sonoran Desert Toad, the Bufo alvarius toad, and the sacred medicine in that. And he's the focus of episode 1. And we premiered in the UK in London We premiered in London at the Rain Dance Film Festival in September 23rd, and that was really great. It was a sellout show. It went out to all the medicine community around the UK, and it was part of this larger film festival, which is really great because it gets these subject matters and it shows, what this is about to more mainstream audiences as well.
Yeah. So you had a sellout, and it's available at the moment for viewing.
Yeah, we've got a few. Yeah, we've got a website, shamansoftheglobalvillage.com, and you can stream or download the 60-minute episode, and the download has an extra 60 minutes of extra scenes as well. It's very, very powerful footage. We've taken a lot of effort to give context to what's happening in this, because what we're going to do, it's intended to be a 6 or 12-part series. And to really, when we say the global village, it's riffing off the Marshall McLuhan quote that he was a media commentator in the 50s, 60s, 70s or so, and he invented the term the global village. And, now I think we can actually see the fruition of that term. We can understand with 30 plus years of globalization, whether we like the socio-political ramifications of it or not, we can understand that we are more interconnected than we've ever been as a planetary culture, and we are whole. And as nation states are falling away and all these separate ideologies are falling away, we can communicate through the internet and we can see each other, and there's more and more tribal structures reforming where people are brought together because of their ideology, not necessarily their nationality or their religion. What drives a village? And in this sense, we say that in the olden days, a village would have many different components and many different skill bases. People would hunt and gather and look after the children, and essentially every village originally had a medicine person, whether that's a wise woman or man who dealt with herbs, who dealt with plant medicines, who dealt with the gifts of the earth that can be taken and interact with us. And so many of them, like I've spent a lot of time with the curanderos of the Amazon, who we call shamans. And it's not just things like ayahuasca or the psychoactives that they deal with. There's many different gradations and levels of medicine people there. In the Amazon, there's tobaccoeras who work with sacred tobacco for divination. There's vegetalistas who work with many different plant medicines. There's ayahuasqueros who specialize in ayahuasca, perfumeros who make flower essences and sacred baths. There's many variations.
It's all part of that dieta process, isn't it?
Dieta is related. It's purifying yourself to be able to engage with nature and hear the song of nature. But essentially, there's hundreds and thousands, literally thousands of medicinal plants, and they all have an effect. So in olden days, in the normal village, if we took a standardized ratio, if there's 100 people in a village and there's one medicine person, in the modern global village, we have 7 billion people. And I think my math is right because it's never been my strong suit, but on a 1 to 100 ratio, we would need 70 million healers or shamans on that same ratio to mediate and to help bring into unity and into good health again, into ease as opposed to disease, the global village. And, it doesn't mean, and how is that going to happen? Because we have so many forces of modernity and oppression happening at the moment in this push to globalization, and we have an equal and opposite sort of understanding of the power of localization and the fact that the root system of culture needs to come from within, not from being forced from without.
So from the local farmers market and
things like that. Yeah. So on the same scale, regardless, it seems to be we're being pushed towards this planetary awareness of ourselves as a whole. And in that awareness, if we can remove, the marketplace interests like big pharma and the commercialization of medicine and of almost keeping people sick from modern lifestyles to then give them Western drugs, which just keep them part of that big pharma industry. If we can remove that and come back to what health really means and have an understanding of how shamanism relates to that and to mediating people's health and to mediating their relationship, not just with the physical earth, but with the astral and with the higher dimensional forces that we're embedded within, then there's a role for the shaman in the global village, I believe.
Well, very much so. And like we've got friends that for example, like Benjamin Mudge, who are currently doing a PhD on the applications of say, ayahuasca in the mental health arena as part of his thesis. So we're seeing that, and with MAPS as well, we're seeing a lot of other research and medical, cross-medical modalities now as we're looking at treating certain mental illnesses with some of these, shamanic substances.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think we always have the wrong end of the stick, or quite often we have the wrong end of the stick, because what's happening is very holistic. And essentially, I mean, one of the best words I have for it is awakening. It's a verb. Something that's happening on the planet at the moment is that we're going through a process. And I believe there's natural cycles of consciousness and natural cycles of world ages, as many indigenous cultures have said. And so this energy that's activating and coming through at this point in his story, or his story as Terence used to call it, Terence McKenna, it's being integrated and absorbed in different ways. So the medical establishment is going back and looking at psychedelics, which are sort of the man-made chemicals, and entheogens is from the Greek, which means, well, it means to invoke the divine within, and it's usually the plant sacraments, although theoretically, things could be man-made and still invoke the divine within. For instance, there's many different, as you mentioned, MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. There's also many different organisations around the world, the Beckley Foundation in the UK, the Hefner Institute, many different established medical and academic sort of institutions that are looking at legally doing tests and have been doing tests with psychedelics and entheogens, with like LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, things like that, to alleviate suffering and trauma with the terminally ill, and also to cluster headaches with LSD, things like that, to look at what the medical applications will be. What's really interesting is the psilocybin tests they've been doing lately. They've been realizing that it's not just a physical thing. And this is the thing with the reabsorption of psychedelics and sacred substances, is it's not just a physical thing. There's actually, and this is where science has an issue with even its language and its paradigm, there's sort of a spiritual component to the healing itself. So with the psilocybin studies, for instance, they've been developing a scale of awareness and the scale of people trying to describe their experiences in psilocybin. And part of it, they have this thing saying, did you have like a mystical experience, or would you describe this as, it's not just a mental experience, it's not just a physical experience. Pretty much like 9 out of 10 people say they have an experience of the numinous or the divine, and that energetic relationship and that connection that they feel is part of the healing and part of the efficacy of these substances. So even science is starting to have to integrate an understanding of the more spiritual components of the holistic approach to these medicines. And so as this energy is coming in and awakening people, again, I say that what's really happening is that we're coming back into relationship with nature and what nature's embedded in, which is life, and that the value of the shamanic approach is to see things holistically and to integrate things holistically into the physical, the mental, the emotional body, the energy body, and then to the larger dimensional ecology we're embedded in. And that as science starts to reabsorb these substances, so too does the shamanic groove or the shamanic pathway. It's developing and blossoming enormously quickly across the world, because many, many people are sick. And it's not just physical illnesses that these substances can help with. It's actually also the emotional and spiritual reconnection to the sacred. And that's what people are really hungry for and people need, because that's what the human birthright is to be a sacred being and to know you're a sacred being, not just in yourself, but connected to nature, connected to people in your tribe and connected to the planet. And there's no separation. And that reconnection is, I think, the greatest gift of the shamanic path.
Yeah. And what made you look at the toads specifically for your first documentary in the series? Right.
Look, everything's evolved very quickly. I've been involved with the shamanic community globally for 10 years now. I first went down to the Amazon in 2006 and was a freelance writer reporting on the ayahuasca boom. And still, even at that point, it wasn't just about ayahuasca. It was about what is the role of the shaman in the 21st century. And I was very, interested in that archetype. And that became a book, Our Awakenings, which became a documentary film of the same name. And it stayed with me for about 7-8 years, working on producing and developing and releasing that book and film. And then last year in 2015, in April 2015, I met Dr. Octavio Rettig, who was visiting Australia. He travels the world actually with his shamanic medicine and legally applies it and works with people. It's only illegal in 7 countries of the world. Basically, the Sonoran Desert toad is native to the deserts of Mexico, the Sonoran Deserts in the north of Mexico near the American border. It's an amphibian that lives 9 months of the year under the ground. And it's very important, I think. It's very elemental because the toad in general as an amphibian walks between 2 worlds. It walks between the earth and the surface world, but also it sort of bridges heaven and earth in that in its glands, in the parotoid glands, so 6 or so glands on its body, it harvests and it accrues this substance which contains both 5-MeO-DMT and bufotenine and other trace elements. And when they are milked and the toads aren't harmed at all, it's painless to the toad. Those glands are like popped, and you can see in the documentary we show all this process. Those glands are milked onto a glass sheet, and then the secretion simply dries and is scraped together, and then it can be smoked. And Dr. Octavio has been amassing an enormous amount of archaeological research and illustrations from different Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, the Olmecs, like about essentially all the archetypal Mesoamerican cultures have pictorial evidence of using the toad, in their surviving texts and illustrations and pictures and carvings.
Yeah.
There's pictures of the toad itself that you'll see, pictures of like Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and then pictures of the toad there. You'll also see this crisscross pattern work, this lattice work, which is indicative of the toad on many robes of the different medicine people in their cultures. And it's similar almost to what can be seen on the effect of the toad in the unified field, the white light in the unified field. But essentially, yeah, so the toad has a long relationship through Mesoamerican cultures and it's believed to have been traded. This is all still very contentious with, as new knowledge comes to light, the existing paradigm needs to, be rewritten and reabsorbed. And, there's people who still challenge that, but Octavio has been sharing this with archaeologists and academics in Mexico who are very, very, very interested in the work that he's been doing archaeologically and looking at the record. So the toad is native to this region in Sonora in the desert, and it's 9 months of the year underground. When it is milked and smoked, the medicine that comes from the toad, the bufotenine is in there, but essentially it's mainly 5-MeO-DMT, which is very close to a neurotransmitter, and it's also endogenous to the human brain. Many different tribal cultures have retained the knowledge of darkness rituals, and if a human is in the dark for 10 to 14 days, the serotonin pathways activate in the sense that the melatonin, which creates the skin pigmentation and the biorhythms and is involved with the light and absorbing the light, starts to fade away, and the tryptamines, which are so endemic and so intimate in the role of consciousness itself. Dr. Rick Strassman did tests with DMT and NDMT in the 1990s, over 20 years ago now, in the only legal studies, modern studies, and some really interesting results. Like DMT is such an interesting compound because it is endogenous to the brain, and it does occur all through the plant kingdom. It occurs in the toads. Well, there's different types of DMT. Essentially, here's the interesting thing: in the total darkness ritual, the brain, the melatonin will go. Pinealine will start to be produced by the brain, which acts in some senses almost like a accentuator and then 5-MeO-DMT will be secreted by the brain, and then NN-DMT will be secreted by the brain. So these things are native and natural to the human condition. It's almost like I consider 5-MeO-DMT to be like God's backdoor access. It's like the on switch. So what happens when you have a spontaneous 5-MeO-DMT experience, or you take an external addition to your own endogenous supplies of 5-MeO-DMT, and there are groups around the world that have been studying 5-MeO-DMT and what's happening neurologically. But essentially, you have the classical mystical experience of the white light, of the sense of whatever your word for God is, especially even atheists. I mean, it's totally non-denominational. It's totally, this is the human condition. This is something which I was saying before about shamanism and right relationship, about how we come back into right relationship. A full release on 5-MeO-DMT, the ego melts away and the drop rejoins the ocean, in the sense of the Sufi mystic Rumi, who had that quote, is that it's very archetypal, and we know from experiences throughout history that people have handed down these experiences. And I think before we had artificial lighting and genetically modified foods, and our biorhythms were more in tune with the earth, these experiences were more common on the planet. And again, we've been out of right relationship, and I believe that all the plant medicines and the earth medicines like the toad and things like ayahuasca and psilocybin and San Pedro, they've always been there. But there's now this juncture where we're being invited back into the garden and invited back into relationship with these substances and right relationship, to remember our place in the heavenly and the terrestrial architecture. Like, I get very mythopoetic, and I can't help but make words like this. But essentially, you can research this for yourself. But the 5-MeO-DMT experience is divine. I mean, it's the closest thing. It's not even the closest thing. It is a religious experience, and it can be invoked and had. There is, I find, always divine timing to this, and there's a lot of responsibility around providers of this medicine, like Dr. Octavio Redig, and there's still a lot of internal medicine community discussion around different pathways, but not just aftercare. There's a lot of discussion because essentially things like ayahuasca in the Amazon have had thousands of years of lineage, and there's anthropological suggestion that the current application of ayahuasca is actually already being heavily influenced by Westerners from the 1950s on, and that what we think of as this ancient lineage is actually something that they've shown to the gringos as they've arrived, and they've wanted to take it themselves. So, for instance, the Shipibo culture, which is one of the main ayahuasca cultures in Peru, they would essentially, the shaman or the medicine person, the curandero, would take ayahuasca on behalf of the patient, and the patient would never take ayahuasca. And ayahuasca itself comes from what we know now is two components: Banisteriopsis carpi, the vine, and chacruna, or another admixture plant, which provides the DMT. And the vine provides an MAO inhibitor, which allows the concoction to be absorbed through the stomach, because our stomach has monoamine oxidase inhibitors that break down the DMT. So the two-in-one create a concoction and this magical ability for DMT to be accentuated, and you have native DMT. But it's called ayahuasca for a reason, because the vine is the ayahuasca. The brew is also called ayahuasca with the chacruna or the DMT leaves added. But it's thought now that, that's a very, very recent, in the last few decades, extension of what ayahuasca originally was, because for the jungle people of the Amazon, it's a purgative ayahuasca, and they want to get rid of the stomach intestinal bugs and keep them clean. And there's a spirit in ayahuasca, Madre ayahuasca, many people believe, that guides and helps people, but that's in the vine itself. The chacruna is the visionary component. And the Westerners who have been coming since the 50s, since like William Burroughs on, have been searching the visionary component, because we only believe things when we see it, because we've forgotten how to feel. And the real truth about the ayahuasca experience is it's not about the visions. It's about what you feel and how you connect to the spirits, to the astral, to yourself, to your subconscious. All that work that's happening doesn't need a visionary component. And in a similar sense, I think it's happening with the toad, except it's different, is that the Buffo alvarius toad has been, obviously for thousands of years, and the anthropological record is still there, but all those empires rose and fell, and they fragmented, and the lineage and the knowledge has been lost. So even though the Buffo alvarius toad, which goes under a few names, there's Buffo incilius is the modern term. It's best known as the Buffo alvarius. It's also called the Sonoran Desert toad. So it occupies the region all around northern Mexico, the Sonoran Desert. There's 13 indigenous tribes who, similar story to most indigenous people all around the world, have been oppressed by the more governmental mainstream forces of that nation state, put onto their reserves, things like that. They've been shaken up, and their land has changed over the last decades and century or so as well. Interestingly enough, one of the neighbours to this area is the Yaqui, which is the Indians made popular by Carlos Castaneda. But there's 13 tribes around the Sonoran Desert.
Isn't that interesting? 13 tribes.
It is interesting, like the Israel and 13 tribes and all this stuff. But the thing is, they must have still had, some knowledge of the toad, but their medicine people weren't working with the medicine, and there wasn't an existing lineage that could be taught to Westerners. And there's great poverty in that region. There's lots of socio-political, issues that need to be confronted about, again, Westerners coming in and working with indigenous resources. So there's a lot of issues that we need to be aware of. Sonoran Desert is also narco drug territory for the Mexican cartels, and they smuggle across to the American border. So it's extremely dangerous. It's extremely, extremely dangerous. We've got a mutual friend, Dean Jeffries, who just went down to Mexico to work on his own documentary about the toad. And he was in the northernmost tribe, and apparently, from the outside, it's always a different story, but on the inside, the power structures there are very cartel orientated. The people on the ground, the indigenous communities, because they're right next to the border of America, well, they are the power structure, and they are potentially integrated with the tribe to a larger degree. And all of these tribes are now aware of the toad. So to give a bit of the background story, Dr. Octavio Reddy was a Mexican classically trained doctor who worked basically as a GP, and he, from medical school onwards, was working just seeing clients all the time. He had his own demons and his own issues. Somewhere along his adolescence or his early 20s, he became a crack addict himself. He was addicted to methamphetamines. And through the re-enchantment with psychedelics and entheogens, plant medicines, he was able to get in touch with himself, but nothing was able to really shift that addiction until he met the Buffo alvarius toad, who was introduced by another Mexican doctor to that medicine. And he then went out into the desert and worked with the Seri tribe on their reserve for about 3 years, where he lived there and he worked there. And it's a very poor community. There at the time was no electricity. There's fresh water has to be brought in. There's just concrete buildings, and they're very proud people. They're very vibrant, beautiful people, but they're very poor. So he just worked there as the GP, as the normal Western doctor, helping them, with all their problems. And because they're in the cartel territory, a lot of them had the same things, the same crack addictions, because all these drugs were sweeping these poor communities. And it's almost like the way that the cartels were doing it to create power dynamics and to control as the flow of other things would go through. So it's a very sad, but also a very archetypal story. And so this, addict who healed himself, which is actually part of the classic shamanic initiation, the initiatory sickness. You have a sickness and you get over it, but because of that, in that sensitivity of the wound, you know how to heal others who have similar wounds. So he was working with the Seri tribe, and especially with the elders of the tribe, and establishing trust. And this is the thing, you can't just go in there and tell them what to do. It took him, 3 years of working with them to get their trust, to know him as the doctor and as almost part of the tribe. He was initiated and brought under the auspices of Don Pancho, who was a village elder. And he introduced the Sonoran Desert toad medicine first to the elders of the tribe that says, look, I think this can help you. This has helped me, where the Western medicines weren't helping, right? The pharmaceuticals weren't helping. They're just covering over the problem, the root cause of this ongoing addiction that many people in the community had, that he had cured himself with the medicine they call OTAC, which is the Seri word for toad. And he initiated the elders. The elders felt the incredible experience of the toad medicine, of the connection to the divine. Science actually says that as well as having this sort of mystical experience, it also flushes the body clean. In immunomodology, it seems to almost be like God's factory reset. So when it's working in the brain, it sets off hormone and endocrine flushes, which then go through the body and I think help physically cleanse from the addiction. But essentially, it's a complete realignment to direct source and the ego dissolving this. So it's basically not just a near-death experience. It essentially is a death experience of the ego. And you get reabsorbed back into the white light, oceanic, all-encompassing, radiating superunion of love, of unconditional love. And these words are not enough to describe the experience. They're all we have in our culture, right? But it's like if you've ever been in love and felt that love, and if you could extend that out to the heart of the sun, to that intensity, that raw vibrational intensity of the white light frequency of love, of the pure vibration that began and sustains the universe, that's what the experience is like. So Dr. Ottavio already gave this to the village elders who got it, realigned, refreshed. There's a beautiful octogenarian village medicine man called Chapo who is there, Chapo Barnett. And apparently, Ottavio told us the story, he gave it to Chapo, who's their medicine man. And in his little stone, one-room little hut, little office, doctor's office, and Chapo takes the medicine. It's like, yeah, I know this, and walked out again. And it was like affected, but not affected more than his own vibrational rate to begin with. And it's like, right, I'm going to go about my day now. That he knows the power of the medicine. The village elders were initiated, and they gave permission to them work on other members of the community who have addictions to help cure them. And then what's been happening is that Ottavio was training up other providers in the village to then work on the village people and things like that. And then he, I guess, has done the time there with the village and had the relationship with them. There's lots of politics and internal, dynamics within every community, so there's lots of different things. But I guess as well as what's happened is that the Seri tribe have rediscovered the power of the toad medicine, which occurs around their region. It's in their general region, and then also the other tribes have as well. So I guess from the outside, Westerners and anthropologists are still piecing together how this medicine has been reclaimed and what the historical record is. Some tribes say that they knew about it before Ottavio. Ottavio basically says that he discovered it about 8 years ago through other people, and it's reintroduced it to the Seri and has kick-started their own remembrance and their own cultural remembrance. And
which is in their DNA.
Essentially it is, but the one thing they gave him in exchange was songs, which in all shamanic cultures are vitally important because songs carry the vibration and the power and the message, and they activate. They're very great gifts. And so they taught Ottavio the songs of their tribe, the medicine songs. They might not have had the toad medicine in their community, but they had the songs and they had their own lineage and their own things. And so he apprenticed with them and he was taught the songs, and he uses the songs now in his work with the Sonoran Desert toad when he travels the world and he legally provides this medicine to Westerners. And so essentially he was archetypally, I think to answer the original question, an incredible archetype of what this show is about. Some people who still, within the medicine community, there's some criticism and some difference of opinion of what it means to be a shaman. And the show Shamans of the Global Village, what we want to look at is, okay, what do Indigenous medicine people, what does it mean to be a shaman to them? And what does it mean to be a shaman in the West with Westerners? Now, he's Mexican, but he travels the world and he's global, but he has the lineage and the connection to the Seri tribe, and he's been taught the songs, which he uses in ceremony for healing,
So, thank you and welcome back, Rak. And we just had some technical issues, but we're back online now. So we were talking about the meaning, the epitome of what it means to be a shaman, and that Dr. Octavia Rettig really exemplifies and embodies that in the modern understanding of medicine man and facilitator.
I mean, for the general public, shaman is like sorcerer or wizard, or it's some mystical sort of archetype. And you know why? It's because we killed all our shamans. We killed our medicine people. We killed our witches. We killed our warlocks. We killed our herbalists and women from, the last 500 years. And when the West, which was again, geopolitically, when it was the empires, whether it's Portuguese or Spanish or English, when it went over to the old world and to South America and places like that, when it found cultures that worship plants and use psychoactive plants to connect with God, like the mushrooms, the holy mushrooms, they call them the flesh of the gods, right? And if you take it, you'll know why, right? Mm-hmm. But to Westerners who were brought up in the Judeo-Christianic, Abrahamic religions, they were the work of the devil. And what did they do in the name of God? They slaughtered all those people, all those tribal people. They anyway, it's the whole tide of history. But what I'm saying is, not only did they kill all the indigenous people and repress their entheogenic shamanic cultures, we exercised our own shamanic culture. And so from the 15th, 16th century on, where science was originally part of alchemy, we had a split. And we had this whole split of coming to a materialist point and to a mechanistic point of view, and then technology and the Industrial Revolution, and science could no longer embrace or even consider a spiritual component, when originally that was the whole basis of science. Science was embedded within alchemy, and it was part of the spiritual appreciation of the way the universe works. But, the medicine people and the magical people had to go underground and had to become dissonant from mainstream world. So when we hear in the 21st century the word shaman, there's been a good decade or so of resurgence of ayahuasca and other plant medicines, but essentially for the mainstream person, it's almost interchangeable with wizard, really. And that's because in the absence of our living, breathing medicine people, we have romanticized them and we projected them, and all of Hollywood is totally entangled with magical archetypes at the moment. And why is that? Because Hollywood as a canvas reflects the deep hunger in the unconscious of humanity. And so we keep getting these projections from our unconscious onto the global media. And Hollywood's a gatekeeper for that. But you have all the Harry Potters, you have all the magical archetypes, because it's not just, it's magic. What is magic? Magic is this alive, tangible connection to the universe. It's your exercising your will. And shamanism is not as clear as that, but essentially with the aid of plant medicines and other entheogens, and, in a big picture sense, what some of these substances can reveal is unity consciousness, and that there's no real separation between me and you and the viewers and the trees and the earth and the ocean and the sky and the sun. Is that in an ecology, in a Gaian sense of what the planet, and James Lovelock coined this term in the 70s, the Gaia hypothesis, after the Greek goddess of the earth, in the sense of what they now call whole earth systems or holistic systems, that the ecosystem has, thousands and millions of species, but essentially it's like looking at the human body, is that we're a colony organism. We're a macroorganism. We're not just this one ego that says, I'm this body with 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and whatever. I have millions of microbacteria that I cannot live without, I will die without. I have millions of organisms within me. I'm a colony, or I'm a group. I'm a collective. And if you look at ourselves, like humanity, as just one strain or one component within the Gaian planetary whole, we are that. We are that whole organism. And it's only in the drive of the ego that we've seen ourselves as individuals. All the other species, we think they're in competition, but they're in actual interdependence. They're in interaction with each other, and the driving force behind the species, the intelligence of nature, the Gaian sort of brain that is orchestrating everything, that's using synergy, and it's using one species to counteract and to react to each other species. So it's like, it's like everything's a one unified whole. And if we look at the role of the shaman, it's helping us see that and bring us back into that harmony of the whole. And it's a very valuable role, which I think is really coming back to the fore in modern times.
Yeah. So it's, and look at the modern ayahuasca tourism, for example, the waves that it's inducing, and it's impacting on the local tribes over there, and other infrastructure now needs to be built up to support that. And what's been done in regards to the Mexican experience? Retreats being set up? Are there sanctuaries in regards to protecting the toad? Or?
Yeah, so let's step back a bit, because Shamans of the Global Village, as I said, is looking at the role of the shaman in the 21st century, Western practitioners especially, or who work in the West with Western people, but who also have a connection or a lineage to indigenous cultures who have been gifted their specific entheogen or their psychoactive substance from the earth. So Terence McKenna used to have this old little riff saying, plan, plant, planet. But there's a plan. There's a dynamic, intelligent plan to the holistic unfolding of how these things are used and what they do. And it comes from the plants and it comes from the planet. And there's no separation. It's all one energy overflowing and coming through. And so the goal for the show as a whole is to look at perhaps the 12 major entheogens that are currently being used in the global shamanic resurgence. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I can remember them all here, but bullfrog various medicine is probably the most recent one. Yep. Ayahuasca especially has become very pronounced in the last 20 years in the West, and has been getting all the major media attention, and rightly so, because it's a great healing mechanism and it's really changing people's lives for the better. Yep. San Pedro cactus, very powerful as well. Psilocybin mushrooms, Salvia divinorum, you could say sacred tobacco, iboga, the West African, the African root being used very successfully to treat addictions. And again, what Westerners use them for and what Indigenous people use them for are often quite different. They use them for initiation because they don't usually have the addictions that we have, quite usually. You could say sacred tobacco, you could even say cannabis, acacias,
and then the other ones like Syrian rue,
hayoma, which is used in Iran and all through the Middle East, and was what would make the carpets red in when they would make their carpets. And the whole idea of magic carpets in the Sufi tradition in the Middle East was that the hayoma actually is a psychoactive, and it's involved with the jinn, the genies, and that whole Sufi sort of tradition. So we really want to go around the world and find these practitioners who work with these substances in a sacred and ethical way on behalf of their communities and have connection to Indigenous lineages. And you know what? It's not always a neat little package. Like Octavio is a Western trained Mexican physician who now works with the medicine, who travels globally, who has Indigenous connection. We have a friend who is basically a Sufi mystic and ordained in his lineage, who works with hayoma, who has petitioned the Ayatollah in Iran for the legal usage of hayoma, Syrian rue, in the ceremony as their holy books, describe, and has been given permission. Wow. But he's not necessarily doing that in Iran yet, and he's not necessarily working with Westerners, but we would like to focus on him. So what I'm saying is the role of the shaman in the West and in the 21st century is diverse. And it's not going to be a neat thing saying, oh, look, there's a guy in the jungle who's 80 years old, wrinkled, and has been working with ayahuasca for 60 of those 80 years, and we can say that he's a shaman, right? And so as the West has been using these substances, and also many people, so again, this is all sort of generalization, but for the great surge in interest in ayahuasca in the last 20 years or so, I would say in a rough estimate, for every 100 people that do ayahuasca, there's probably 30 or so that stay on the ayahuasca path and that want to do it regularly. And there's probably, 10% of that who want to actually, not want, but feel this call to action from the plant spirits itself that say, we would like you to work with us on an ongoing basis, to be a caretaker, to be that medicine person. And this is what happens with Indigenous people. We have in the West an enormous chip on our shoulder, as big as history, right?
Yeah.
That we're wrong and that we're not worthy. And, maybe for some of that might have been true. But essentially, we're all God's children, right? And it's like, if we are called by God or by spirit or by the aliens or by whatever thing you believe in, but if it's, and the validity is another question. But it's like when you work with spirit, with plant medicines, there is a tangible relationship with the spirit in the plants. And many people feel the call from the plant spirit that says, I really want to work with you. Will you work with me? And that means you take that plant medicine on a regular basis, and she or he, the spirit of the plant, will train you, will teach you its secrets, will teach you how to work with it, and will teach you then how to spread that medicine to other people in need of healing. Those people are the shamans of the global village. And in a 1-to-100 ratio with 7 billion people, we need a lot of these people. We need a lot of them. And within that, there's good and bad apples. And it's up to the community to self-regulate and to work it out. I mean, what is the difference between hearing a voice in your head and being delusional and being called to the shamanic path?
And channeling.
I might think I know. I'm not able to say that for another person. But what I'm noticing happening is a growing ratio of these people are developing in Western medicine circles across the planet. And in lineages like the ayahuasca tradition, there are communities across the planet which are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. There are churches in the West, Santa Daime and Inaho de Vegetal. And there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who do ayahuasca in the West around the world with entrenched lineages, with safety mechanisms, with the duty of care and best practices. And when they have community, they have other people that can say, like, you stepped over a line. And that's what we need. So as medicine grows, the power dynamic grows and the potential for abuse grows, and the need for support mechanisms and the need for others in the community grows, because you're not a shaman unless you're working in a community. I would say you're a mystic. If you're doing it on your own and you're not helping heal people, you're on a mystic path. And that's sort of where I'm more drawn, is to my own personal relationship with God and to the spirits and to be in service. And more, it's like, well, if you're going to do it, you end up doing it with people and you end up sort of helping people. So I lead ayahuasca retreats in Peru. I work with my maestro, Percy Garcia Lozano, who is an incredibly impeccable curandero, vegetalista, perfumero. He is the shaman, right? But more and more, I've been learning from him. And I'm not saying I'm a shaman, but I am there in service. I'm helping people where I can. It's a big responsibility. And a lot of the criticism of the shamanic movement from within the shamanic movement is people have a ceremony of ayahuasca, they receive the calling, or they have this inflamed egoic. The ego is the big thing, right? So in many of these substances, what we say is they develop, they help reveal the God within, which is always within us. You don't need to take a plant to see that you're holy, you're divine, and you're perfect, and God is within. In the West, because we're so sick and because we're so turned on to big pharma and to the ego and to advertising and to bad food and to our vibration is so low, sometimes we need that thing to break through. Like Daniel Pinchbeck had the book Breaking Open the Head, which was in the Bwiti tradition with Iboga and the Bon. So many people who stay on the medicine path with plant medicines, they feel the call. But if they're not part of a community learning from a trained curandero or maestro or someone that's training them, and a lot of people saying it's valid as well, the spirit in the plants is the one that teaches. And so you can have an initiation and you can never connect with another shaman or person, and you can just be taught by the plants. That is completely valid, and people need to respect that. But then how do we vet shamans? How do we go, well, you have been trained by this voice you hear, you say is a spirit in the plant, and you've been taught these things, and now you're going to set up shop in the West and charge money, which is another big issue in the medicine communities. And I'm going to say, look, people who say that you can't charge money to provide medicine to people,
they're not.
or they're naive, and I've been naive. I've been there. Ron Wheelock, who is another classic example, he's been on CNN, he's been in all these documentaries in the West. He's called the Gringo Shaman. He felt the call to spirit. He moved to Peru in 1996. He went deep into the jungles of the Amazon. He didn't speak Spanish. He found a curandero that would teach him. He learned Spanish and he learned ayahuasca at the same time. He stayed 2 years in the jungle. He came out able to speak Spanish and able to engage with ayahuasca and to do ceremonies with an intensive dieta and an intensive relationship with the plant medicines. And spirit told him, don't charge money.
Wow.
So for the first 18 months or so of him working with the medicine, well, actually a few years, because when I met him in 2006, he'd just crossed this boundary. He would do it by donation. Mm-hmm. And you need an energy exchange. It takes an enormous amount of energy to brew ayahuasca, to go get ayahuasca, to brew it up, to put the energy into it, to love it, to make sure the vibration is pure, to then sit in ceremony and exert your energy in a 6, 10, 12-hour ceremony, and then to do follow-up. Like it takes your entire life. You have no time to do anything else. And then if people in your village are supporting you, if it's not a monetary economy, the old school village system would be that all these people, you work, the shaman's on the edge of the village because he's of the world but not in it, because he can't be in the everyday affairs of the world, although in many instances he'd be called to be almost a chieftain or the political mediator between the earthy realm, because he's not attached to it. He has no attachment to it. So there was this power thing. By not wanting power, he's in a powered position. But the same with money. If you're in a village scenario, they'll give you chickens or they'll give you food, you have your bowl of rice, and you'd be the medicine person. And it's not about money, but they'll give you energy. They would support you, right? Yeah. So Ron tried to do that, and he was doing it with Westerners. So Westerners would breathe through, and they would give him no money, or they'll give him 20 soles, like $7 American. And he'd be like, and he did it for as long as he could, and the Westerners broke the contract.
Yeah.
But saying it's by donation means that people who don't value it, when their value system is money, and if you say it's $100 and they know it's $100 and they give you $100, they value you more, because that's just the Western system, unfortunately. So I know many medicine people that have tried to do it by donation, and it just doesn't work, because it's 1 foot in the old or new paradigm and 1 foot in the Western paradigm. And you cannot do medicine work ongoingly. And very few medicine people actually support themselves just by doing medicine. And it's a big issue, but you need to have an exchange. And it's not enough to be just given a chicken or a bowl of rice in the Western world and to be providing medicine services. So, you need to have an ethical approach to money, but you need to actually redefine your relationship to money, say it's an energy. And it is okay, if you're in integrity in the way you do your work, to set a price for it and to, get an exchange for it.
You can suggest that amount.
You can suggest that amount. I mean, originally what I was told in the Amazon was that a good curandero should never refuse someone in need of healing. And, I, just in terms of aid and in service to the general community, I get emails, Facebook messages, calls, quite a few every week, of people needing help. I can't give them medicine, that's not my role, but I try to connect them to people globally that can help. And I don't charge for that. It's like it takes a lot of my time and energy, but I'm in service and I'm trying to connect people together as well. And medicine people especially need to be supported and honoured and valued in that role. Eventually, I think when the world economy collapses and we get back to a more sustainable way of living, which is in reciprocation of energy, then the shamans and the medicine people can really come to the fore, because it's paying the rent on the 9 to 5, which shamans or medicine people have to do as well. Whether you call them shamans or neo-shamans or medicine people or facilitators, they're people too. And especially with Westerners, these are some of the teething issues we need to look at of, are you in service to your community? Is there an ethical exchange of energy and of money? Are you practicing best practices? Do you have peers that can say, hey, you can't sleep with that person because you've treated them. You can't energetically abuse them. There's got to be ethics around it. And if they're a lone wolf shaman, in a sense, that's some of the dangers. And even with the established traditions, So all these are teething issues we're facing in the Western medicine culture as it goes planetary, and it's really going off now. So your question at the start, the OTAC medicine, because it had a disconnect in its lineage and it's being kickstarted back into action, there's not the established traditions, but there are things like in the Seri tradition, the established songs. They're coming in. Octavia uses those. The other practitioners we're looking at documenting in the show as we go forward, they're all Westerners who hopefully have a connection to indigenous lineages. There's a mushroom shamaness who's worked with the curanderas of Mexico, looking at all the way back to Maria Sabina, who is one of the Virgin Mary who brought magic mushrooms or the psilocybin or the flesh to the gods to the West through Gordon Wassoon and initiated the altered states of the 20th century paralleling LSD.
She brought the songs in as well.
And the songs in. And this is the other great thing. It's not just about the medicines and the peak experience. What's happening in the global shamanic resurgence, drawing upon indigenous lineages, is this understanding of ritual and of the container of the ceremony and of all the other components that make up part of the healing and part of how we engage with right relationship with the spiritual realm. And that's just as important as the core medicine itself. So you can now have cacao ceremonies. You can have this idea of the circle and of coming together in a group for healing, to use the power of voice and of song and of sound and of prayer and intent. And a lot of the things like, mantra, all of those things. And, all of these things are very powerful to focus our intention, because ultimately what many of these medicines all reveal is that we are the medicine ourselves. It's that these are just extensions of us in the plant and animal kingdom that are helping catalyze our own internal ability to connect with the divine. So when they've done legal medical research with LSD, with psilocybin, with ayahuasca, invariably they found with all three of these substances, they switch off different regions of the brain called the default mode network. Mm-hmm. And each entheogen slightly different regions. And what's happening with these substances is they switch off these regions of the brain, and then the brain or the mind at large is connecting to the universe, and we're having the psychedelic experience. Mm-hmm. These substances don't necessarily create the psychedelic experience in you. They just remove the obstacles from you having the direct psychedelic experience. They remove the veil. Or as Aldous Huxley said, the mind at large. And so we are the medicine. And things like ayahuasca, it's not that it can heal you in one ceremony of your cancer or your trauma or your emotional damage. It's that it reveals within you, and your subconscious often comes up in your conscious mind, and you relive whatever your trauma or your wound is. And in being aware of that, you're discharging it from your energetic body, which is creating the physical dis-ease or illness. So there's a holistic relationship that these substances reveal within us, that we have the power and we have the sovereignty and we are the medicine. Mm-hmm. And essentially, I wonder if that ratio of 1 to 100 of medicine people or shamans in the global village, I wonder if that's just a blip in history, where you look at cultures like the Aborigines of Australia, where they have an understanding of dreamtime consciousness, which is essentially very close, I believe, to where we go in DMT realms, of interacting with and being conscious of this interpenetration of the astral and of multidimensionality at all times. How do we navigate that? If we as a culture can navigate multidimensionality and see into our energetic bodies and heal ourselves, we're all shamans. Mm-hmm. We don't need the hierarchy and the specialization. I think shamans have been a fallback for the medicine person and the training of the village to ensure their survival in a stage of human consciousness when we have fallen out of first unity consciousness and then dreamtime consciousness and then to baseline consciousness. So I basically call it, we have 5-bar galactic Godhead consciousness, center of the Mayans, center of the galaxy. We're now facing the center of the galaxy, which NASA has confirmed is a black hole. The Mayans called that Hunab Ku, the womb of the Great Mother, was their term for it. Yeah, from which all springs. And astrophysics, to me, modern astrophysics is as exciting as psychedelics. Like, it's completely psychedelic. Please research as much as you can astrophysics, because it's trippy. And what it tells you these days is all these energetic interconnections, which holistically seem to reinforce and pattern match the entheogenic and shamanic experience. It basically, they say now that around the event horizon of a black hole, certain as it draws in all these energies and matter, certain energies coruscate and gather around the event horizon of the black hole and then are ejected out again as plasma, which is the igniting spark of, it sparks all the different ambient sort of space dust and component materials, and it births suns into being. So the black hole, the womb of the great mother, as indigenous minds believed, does birth suns into being, which is the source of life, right? And so there's all these connections and these weavings and these unifications between indigenous cosmologies and modern physics and modern understandings. And, we won't even talk about quantum yet because that's another buzzword, but more and more I think we're all understanding that there are different languages for the same thing, and we're getting a unified appreciation of the universe and our place in it. And then as part of that, I believe in the world ages like the Mayans and all indigenous cultures who have long oral records going down tens of thousands of years, they have mapped different world ages, whether it's say Kali Yuga or the Iron Age, the Golden Age, things like that. And as well as world ages, I believe there's consciousness ages. So the Mayans would say that the center of the galaxy, Hunabku, was, as well as being where all life is birthed from, they said it was the seat of consciousness in their language. They said it was the seat of where consciousness comes from. And, if we go through phases of consciousness, it seems like we are now coming back to a very five-bar signal where all of last history, the last more than 10,000 years or so, and obviously history goes beyond 10,000 years, and different researchers like Graham Hancock have been pointing out to the archaeological record of previous civilizations which are very, very old indeed and have evidence of, advanced technologies and advanced cityscapes and things like that, and that they rise and they fall, and we go through phases of consciousness and of empire building and of coming together as communities. But in those phases, there's the golden age, which is the peak experience where everything comes together and we're connected to a larger consciousness and a larger relationship with the earth. And then it has a fall. You fall from unity consciousness, which is in all the biblical traditions and things like that. And then you go into different gradations of consciousness, but it's a cycle. Yeah. And it feels to me that we're coming full circle in that cycle and we're coming back to the golden age. Mm-hmm. And so this relationship with plant medicines and this medicalization of psychedelics, they're all different facets of this same awakening process as the energy is awakening for everyone on the earth. And we're coming back into this larger Gaian relationship.
And no longer is there that separation of science and spirit, that there's that conglomeration now.
Well, the beautiful thing about plant entheogens and the shamanic tradition is that you feel it. It's not just a mental relationship that you can prove the math of some obscure scientific physical reaction, right? It's that you have a relationship or an emotional relationship with what you were experiencing. And that really, to a degree, is what science has been lacking. So I love science. Science is an incredibly valuable tool. And we're just being... we're being a Western prejudice if we don't appreciate the science of indigenous cultures of how they work with plant medicines.
The alchemy.
They in the Amazon, they call it the science of curanderismo, the science of healing, where they know tens of thousands of medicinal plants. They can do cause and effect. They can do double-blind studies. They can prove to you that that person can be healed with this plant and that can have this effect. And they study for decades to be the masters of their art, to the maestro shamans. And so, it's like we need to appreciate and come back into a unified appreciation of indigenous medicines and indigenous science as well as Western science.
And so you've just come back from Mexico and also the world tour with the airing of the first episode, launching of it in London. What is the next direction for you? What's episode 2 going to be focused on?
So here I must reiterate that I'm in a partnership with my creative director, Niles Heckman, who is the director of the show and has a great, couldn't make the show without him. Like I have the shamanic drive in my experience, but Niles has the cinematography and the direction and, years of experience in Hollywood working on, post-production in many big Hollywood films. And he has this cinematic eye, which really makes this show incredibly special. It's an incredibly beautiful artifact. So the goal for the show is to examine the role of the shaman in the 21st century, the relationship to plant and animal psychoactive medicines, and the lineage to indigenous cultures and the connection to the planet, right? And so with Niles, we're exploring the potentials of these medicines and the role of the shaman and the intricacies of not just what you think the shaman is, but what the reality of some of these people are going through. And maybe they don't call themselves shamans, but that is the umbrella term for the show, and that is the Western conceit that we have all created of medicine people. And there's certain beats to, what the definition of a shaman is. Essentially, it's the idea that it's a bit of an amalgamation between a priest, a doctor, a healer, a traveler between the worlds. And essentially, I think the healing is the key component. Can this person help heal someone? And that would be the healer, shaman, medicine person versus just the mystic tradition who might be able to engage with spirits on an astral realm and work with plant medicines on an internal sense. So, Westerners who are treading this shamanic path, I salute them. It's a very hard path. It's very confronting. It's very ego-dissolving. Sometimes it can be ego-aggrandizing, which is the danger. And
legalities too,
legalities,
governments,
yeah. So we are only focusing on people who work with these medicine in countries where this is legal. And it's interesting. There's been different studies looking at, Terence McKenna and other commentators from the 60s on had this idea that these psychoactive substances are all throughout nature, and they work, essentially humans take them, but some other mammals take them as well. There's some clips on YouTube where you'll see jaguars or black pumas clawing at ayahuasca vine and nibbling at it and rolling around, which is interesting how it can activate, without the DMT, it's just activating of the medicine itself. But different members of the species engage with these medicines where it's like cats who have catnip or something. They, if they know that they're ill and they want a medicine, but humanity especially needs plant medicines to be brought back into relationship with the planet, because we've been treating the planet like a resource, like a shopping mall, to strip mine. And it's ridiculous, because if you remember that we're one macro object, if you took all the calcium out of your body and put it on the table, you'd die. So what are we doing to the planet, which is us? Because we've lost the ability to see that is us. And that is what these substances really do. They help us remember. So Westerners working with these substances, we're hoping to go to Gabon in Africa in June next year, in 2017, and to work with a Western medicine person who has a deep experience with this medicine, has been initiated by the Bwiti tribe in Gabon. And we're still confirming that is going to be episode 2, but we're really hoping that will be. We have a mushroom shamaness, a Western woman, who will be a focus of a future episode, and we'll be looking at doing that in Mexico. It's interesting to look at where these substances are around the world. Potentially they're all around the world, but they do cluster in sort of, South America, Mesoamerica, different regions like that. Siberia with the Amanita muscaria mushroom, and some of the lineages like that. Like I've been in contact with a Western practitioner who lives in Lapland. And when I say West, it's like it's okay, he's a global practitioner. But he was saying that the native people there don't really work with the Amanita muscaria anymore. He works with San Pedro in Lapland and in that region. And he was actually arrested a few years ago for, I think, importing San Pedro, and the case went to trial, and it was legal. There was no illegality about using San Pedro in his country, but there was a prejudice thinking it should be illegal, and they charged him, and they had no basis to stand upon. So many of these practitioners do face prejudice and do face the arm of the law, and we must remember these substances have been used since we've been human, right? And it's only really been since the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, a few hundred years ago, that these and the judo, Christianic sort of tradition saw these as the work of the devil versus the plants of the mother and of Gaia. And then on that, basically the dominated culture, as Terence McKenna called it, of the empire, whether that was the British Empire that's morphed into the American Empire, which has morphed into how do we control the most amount of the populace and how do we sedate them as they become a large consumer base, and how do we ensure that to consume they need to be sick to actually have our pharmaceuticals and things like that we can control them with. And so it was in 1971 that the paragon of virtue, Richard Milhouse Nixon, declared a war on drugs. And when he declared a war on drugs, it wasn't just on the tail end. It was on the tail end of LSD, but essentially it incorporated all the indigenous plant materials, and through the United Nations, it became the United Nations Psychotropic Drug Convention in 1971, which all the signatory countries then adhered to, and that criminalized, apart from some very lucky countries like the Mesoamerican countries, which had traditions with, like, say, coca or ayahuasca or things like that, which had exemptions, it basically said that people in these Western countries cannot use these plant materials because we call them drugs. Even like marijuana, which we now know marijuana and the CBD oil in marijuana is a very powerful medicine and is healing people all across the world. And there's been a disinformation campaign for generations to control people and control their buying dollar and to keep them sick and, to control people's consciousness and their health. And so this is starting to fall away. There's many movements of people and organizations. There's MAPS, as we've said, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, which is bringing these substances back into the medical arena. And they've been fighting for 30 years and lobbying the FDA and the American government to test and to scientifically say, hey, back in the 60s, many of these things were used and they were studied before they were banned. And there was all this proof that they had medical value. And your rules say that you can only be a class A or a class 1 substance that is banned if it has no medical value. And they're lying. They're lying. I mean, it's becoming blatantly obvious around the world that our governments are lying to us about pretty much everything, including the ability and the efficacy of these substances, which must be used in the right way with the right relationship with the right providers, which is why the medicine people are being rebirthed into the planetary arena to be the caretakers of these substances, because they're not just a pill, they're not just something which can be mass produced, they're grown by the earth, whether it's a plant like ayahuasca or a toad. They're living creatures and they have a spirit in them. And when we take these substances from living creatures, we engage with the spirits, and we need to do it in the right way. And you can't mass commercialize these substances. So again, we're hoping to go across the world, and we're hoping to legally, sit in ceremony. One of the things we want to do is not just explore the archetype of the shaman. We want to show it. We want to show it in action. And we are going to ethically and carefully show what it is like to be in a ceremony with these shamanic healers and to be part of this ceremony. And yes, this is potentially something that mainstream audiences haven't seen before. And I believe it's time. I believe that we need to take away the veil of secrecy and of mystique and show the power and the sacredness and the hard yarns. Like if you see episode 1 of our show, Shamans of the Global Village, it's pretty full on. Like it's not something to be dabbled with. You will see the ceremonies about the last 15 minutes of the show. And for instance, Octavio Redig has been, his support team has been filming many of the people he's been treating around the world, and some of his, there's many, probably even hundreds of his videos of clients going through the ceremony on YouTube. So this isn't new footage, but in one place in a documentary show to be on the internet, we show the introduction of the shaman, we show their background, what led them onto the path. We are engaged, learning their history, how they work with the medicine, what their, background is. And one thing I must say is that I don't know how it was overlooked, and it is a big oversight. We did need to comment in episode 1 that there are dangers working with 5-MeO-DMT in toad medicine. It is all of these substances. They're not for everyone. They're not, especially on not just a physical level, on a psychic level. It can be very revealing. Not for people potentially with mental illnesses or sensitivities. Although I would say that in Indigenous cultures, if you have a sensitivity which is labelled an illness or an aberration in Western culture, you were usually chosen and initiated to become the medicine person or to train with the medicine person. And, your sensitivity or your gift was absorbed into the needs of the tribe and was given a place and not given a stigma. But 5-MeO-DMT is very dangerous for people with heart conditions because it can put stress on the heart if they have high or low blood pressure, or it can be very mentally challenging because what is revealed is that you are not what you think you are. You are essentially God on earth, and that realization can be, the way that the ego is removed or dissolves away can be incredibly frightening for people with any fragile mental states, or even strong people who can fight and the ego, wanting to remain. And the same with all these substances. That's why we have a shaman, why we have gatekeepers and have a duty of care to look after their guests and the clients and to make sure that they're integrated. And integration is the key thing in the Western medicine tradition, whatever the substance is that we're all facing, is that these experiences are so powerful and so such a revelation that, you might be fine in ceremony, you have this enormously transformative experience. You're fine that day, you're fine that night, you're fine on your retreat, you're fine for a week, and then you come back to your old world and you're like,
how do you integrate?
The veil has been removed, and then you go back to the job and you go back to and you've got to go back to the world. This is what Joseph Campbell said. There's 3 stages to this. There's departure from the world that you know. There's initiation into the true nature of reality in your being. And then there's the return. And you come back to your tribe with that awareness of the return. The problem in the West is you come back to your tribe and your community and you say, oh my God, I took ayahuasca and I met snakes and I met these alien creatures and they operated on me and they took out this thing and they put this crystal in my head and they showed me that I was, an eternal being, there was a soul, and I have no fear of death. And the jaw just drops and they look at you and they don't understand. And in the worst case scenario, they try to medicate you.
Yeah.
And they say you're crazy.
You're schizophrenic.
So you have to be very careful. And that integration, it's not just the experience, it's how do you integrate that worldview which is opened up to you when you go back into the world, which is a different paradigm, which is also transforming very rapidly. And you have to carefully outreach to your beloveds and share your truth, but not push your truth and proselyte and become this messianic figure that's like, everyone should do ayahuasca, everyone should do toad, everyone should walk the shamanic path. The path will call you. And the shamanic path includes, as we said before, mantras, vocalization, sound, singing, body work, energy work, meditation, yoga, tantra, lovemaking, magic. We are divine shamanic beings and we are the medicine, and all these things can activate within us, and all these are our potentials. And you can't wake people up that are in a dream. The Shipibo tradition we mentioned before, they believe that the ayahuasca world, and not just ayahuasca is the trigger, but the reality that it reveals is the real world, and that this is the dream. And interestingly enough, in quantum physics, David Bohm has this idea that the implicate, the originating source world is the origin, and that this whole world, the explicate, is the projection or the holographic projection from the implicate, and that this is like a play of Lila that is underway, but this isn't the real world, that our true beings, our avatars, our higher dimensional selves are up there, and that we are engaging in a process down here that it's not to say this isn't real, but this isn't the only real. There's a higher level reality that physics and science seems to agree upon, and the shamanic worldview seems to agree upon. But if you go trying to tell that out in the world and run around and aren't integrated in your approach, hold the medicine within you. Find the others become part of a community. This is sort of the religious impulse that is reawakening in Western culture, which has been denuded and atrophied for hundreds of years. And it's a delicate balance, and we need to approach it in a delicate way.
Yeah, especially when it comes to integrating and aftercare. And as you said, some people can, find that they have a meltdown. Maybe they're post-traumatic. So aftercare is really important, and what we're finding out in shamanic circles, it's just that the importance of establishing a support network for that.
And that's the thing, you're saying, again, this template of a shaman in a village, right, which is this idolized template, which indigenous cultures used to have. I guess I'm an old hippie, but in the sense of every hippie I've ever known is that we all want this idea of community, right? But it's going to cost about $3 million to buy the land, to set up the infrastructure, to get everyone together. Indigenous cultures who are dirt poor are born into their community. They don't have to try. Yeah. And the 60s example of when you do try, but you come with these competing ideologies and egos and different levels, and then have to work that out to become a cohesive community on the land. We're coming at it from the tail end of history where all these cultures are born into it. And, it's almost the same with the shamanism thing. It's like, okay, so we have practitioners, and essentially they work within the container of ceremony, and people who may not know each other go over to countries where there's illegal, and they do these shamanic practices and ceremonies. And in the retreats I lead, I'm very lucky that people find me through my podcast. It's called In a Perfect World, or through my shamanic media and my outreach to the community. And they're already sort of on my vibrational wavelength. And when we come together as a disparate group, we very quickly form like a family unit. And we really nurture each other, and we become really good friends because we go through these transformative experiences together. But essentially, with shamanic practitioners around the world, people come together and might not know each other, and you become very close in these experiences, but then you leave again and you go back into the world, and we don't have the village.
It's like festival culture.
It's like, yeah.
Like Burning Man, they gather.
Yeah. Well, there's a philosopher called Hakim Bey who lives in the UK, and he called these temporary autonomous zones. And the thing to aim towards is a permanent autonomous zone, which is the village.
Yes.
But because of the socioeconomic nature of Western culture, land, which is the originating primal gift of Gaia, which we are part of and we are meant to be caretakers of, has now become property, right? And has been thefted, if that's even a word. It's been stolen from us for hundreds of years, and is now so expensive. It's handed down to the elites, and no one can afford it anymore. So we're now the Gaian refugees of history who can't afford to be on the land, which is free. And that's why it has to collapse. That's why the system and the economic system has to go down so the natural system can come back up. So at the moment, our village is dispersed. Our village, and I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but I know a lot of shamanic community around the world, and I know of a lot of communities around the world, and it's definitely in the hundreds of thousands, and I would guesstimate it's even in the millions around the world of people who regularly partake of shamanic sacraments. At the moment, though, we're dispersed and we're invisibilized amongst the general community, and we come together in these temporary autonomous zones like festivals or retreat weekends or things like that, and we go back. And it's like a yin and a yang, an in-breath and an out-breath. But what it's building to is this ache and this desire to come together and to stay together on the land, and not to do medicines all the time.
No,
I mean, shamanic, to cook together, to live together, to love together, to be together on the land as a tribe, as a village, as human beings, like being, right? And then you look at certain cultures, certain tribes of the Amazon would do ayahuasca or their sacraments, yopo, the DMT stuff. They do it as ritual and a celebration, maybe once a month on the full moon, something that can unify and bond you together to remember that you are connected to the divine. And, you need a unifying ideology as a tribe. And that's what culture has tried to do with nation states and religions and flags and ideologies that really the millennial generation doesn't give a shit about. They're more unified by, other tribes than they are by nation states or the old school religious impulse. And so as that dies away, the thing that can join us together again is this sense of being and a sense of belonging and a sense of identity as spiritual beings. And that can be mediated by the shamanic path. And that has a value in the tribe. And, the next step is to come together, to find the resources, to be in countries where these are legal, or to legislate and lobby for the decriminalization of these sacred substances in all countries. On the land, how can a plant be illegal? How can your consciousness be illegal? It goes against all the American Declaration of Independence, of the right to life, liberty, and freedom, including that of consciousness. If you cannot have the right to your own consciousness, then you are oppressed. The whole political system and the legal system and the monarch system of kings. The king was the representative of God on earth. You look it up in the original, you go to the sovereignty movement and you go back into the original international law where they traded across the seas and the language around that. The king or the queen was the representative and the mediator between you and God on earth. It was a representative like the Inca, who was the shining one, or the golden one, who was, again, like the king on earth, And that is a hierarchy because there is no separation between you and God on earth. You are God on earth. And even if you don't believe in that word God, you are divine. You are alive. You are a representative of spirit. And there are no masters and there are no gods over you. It's within you. And so this is consciousness. This is spirit. This is to be alive. And this is the time we need to reclaim our power, because we are powerful. And these times are very transformational. And again, I believe that it's all interconnected. It's all divine timing. It's all orchestrated. I've had so many incredibly profound experiences in spiritual realms that have shown me the intricacy, because it's not just that the planet is one interconnected being extending itself and that we are all like petals on a single flower. All of humanity is a single flower in the garden, right, of Gaia. And Gaia is one single jewel in Indra's net, which connects across the cosmos. And I saw in my feed this morning, they've just figured out that there's trillions more stars than they ever thought there were. And if you've ever seen those snapshots of, galaxies and the way they look, it looks identical to the synaptic pathways of the brain, right? That each star is a nodal point in the neural pathways of the macro galactic universal consciousness. That the physical representations of the stellar objects, of suns and stars and all those objects on the macro level are no different than what's happening in our brain on the micro level. And that we are all interconnected. There is no separation. It's all one unified being, which is too much for our consciousness to handle, which is why we've gradiated down to baseline consciousness now. And now is the time of the awakening, that we are starting to blossom back up to the awareness of dreamtime consciousness and of the interconnection and the interpenetration of all things. And that is all perfect. And we are all perfect. Yeah.
We're all perfect. And also we're ambassadors, we're representatives, we're God having a human experience here on earth. Where there is no separation between you or I. It's all just a relative dimensional thing. It's like a play, as you said.
Before we had governments, and again, hierarchy is, I think, the fallback. Here's the thing. At one stage, even the Bible and all the different sort of religious texts and the older texts, which predate governmental systems, these are all just control mechanisms for the mediation of culture, because, we do need structure. It's not that anarchy is not its own structure and its own freedom, but self-organizing structures. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what the cells of the body do. There's a template that we organize around that forms the human organism. And on a macro level, the tribal or societal organisms that we form are also structured into templates. And before we've had political systems, we've had religious systems. And the religious systems are actually the fallback from the spiritual systems, because religions are sort of scaffolding and templates to practice faith. But if you look at the origins of like Hinduism and the Rig Veda, they had a soma, they had a psychoactive substance which connected them to the divine. Christianity, if you look at John Allegro and the mushroom and the cross, and even existing Bibles before they were translated into Greek, which the Vatican has locked down, and some churches which still have them, on their glass. They say that it wasn't an apple or the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was actually a mushroom. And this sounds like a huge claim, but look into it. Is that there was, if you think of the water into wine and how that miracle happened, in the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and every year on Facebook you'll see around Christmas time all these posts from many different sites looking at the origins of Santa Claus and the reindeers and the Siberian shamans and the Amanita muscaria mushrooms. The reindeers would eat them and their liver would purify any of the bad things in the mushrooms. And then the shamans or the people would drink the reindeer piss, right, the urine, which was purified with the Amanita muscaria, and they would go on these shamanic journeys, like the water into a wine to alter consciousness. Anyway, what I'm getting at, even in the Middle East with the Hayoma, with the Syrian rue and the magic carpets, all the original cultures of the earth had shamanic sacraments, had entheogens. All the root of the religious cultures had sacraments which would alter their consciousness and connect them to the divine. And they solidified over time. The Egyptians, they had blue lily. There's all these cultures. Chavin in South America and Peru, which was like a nation state or a city state, which had they've had evidence of DMT snuffs in the pipes and the bowls. There was predominantly a San Pedro cactus culture. They had probably ayahuasca. It's so many cultures. If you get beyond the politics and the dogmas and the modern veilings of the truths, had psychoactive substances at their core. Somewhere along that line, though, in the implementation of that, priestcraft developed to be gatekeepers and dispensers of those medicines. And with climate change and whatever changes that happened in their culture, they lost the original sacraments, and what they were left with was like the template, or the remainder was the structure.
Yeah, it's a fragment, like the wafer and the wine and the
They were left with the ritual. They were left with the ritual, which was hinting at an echo of the original experience. So do the research. The Mysteries of Eleusis, which was ancient Greece, which was the basis of modern democracy and the basis of so much of our Western culture, with science and maths and philosophy and ethics and morals. They had entheogenic psychedelic culture for 2,000 years, where they would take part in the mysteries of the rites of Eleusis, which was a sacred substance, which I'm going to mispronounce, the kykeon, which was probably something like an LSD substance made from the ergo rye and the barley and the fungus around that, which revealed to them their divine nature. And it was given to men, women, and slaves in their culture, which crossed all the socio-political boundaries and went to the root, core of being human. They had this. It's out there. It's in the public record, in the public domain, in the historical records. But because of the bias of Western culture and dominated culture against these substances, it's been censored through history. But it's all there. You can do the research yourself. I'm not meaning to politicize or to antagonize anyone's belief system or anyone's lineage. All I'm saying is the anthropological record is there, the historical record is there, and it's been very pronounced. And, all of these grand cultures would rise and fall at their root in the origins of perhaps what made them a culture or what made them a civilization. Was
the plants themselves.
Yeah,
they were the teachers and the healers.
Because we know the spirits in the plants educate and teach and give information, and especially with the tryptamines. And I've talked to a lot of people in the psychedelic community about this, and people have these experiences where tryptamine consciousness itself, and I'm not sure if it's an external entities or an internal experience of internal capacity we have within ourselves. But essentially, one of the things they do very dynamically is they can mediate and move the body. Your ego's over here, and they can move the body into mudras, different mudra positions which energetically attune you into asanas, body positions, and the meditation states. So it seems to me the origins of yoga and meditation are deeply rooted in the tryptamine experience. And I can
look at the hand mudras that sometimes naturally appear in people experiencing toad, for example.
This is what I mean. And it's like the body is a receptacle and a vessel for, universal energy. And when these substances are invoked, what happens to the body is it becomes an antennae for this intelligence and these downloads. And the knowledge moves us in certain positions to shift energy around. And so what is yoga? Yoga is the takeaway from a deeply psychedelic entheogenic experience of divine energy coming through the body. And when the entheogenic sacrament that it was the originating experience is taken away, then we're taught yoga still. But we're not taught that it came from an entheogenic experience. That's fine. But if you practice, and this is the thing with psychedelic and shamanic cultures around the world, I was introduced to a beautiful chant, Om Bo Bwat Swaha Tat Savito Varenyam Bhago Devasyata Mehi Diyo Yana Tachodayat. Anyway, that was taught to me by a German lady in ayahuasca ceremony, before the ayahuasca ceremony in Peru a few years ago. And we've been using that at our retreats ever since. And so it's this mashup of cultures, but it charges you up energetically. And Percy, the curandero, will come in and go, what have you guys been doing? I can feel the energy in the Malacca, right? But this is what I mean. All these traditions have power and things, but even that chant, those words, sure, they have a linguistical word to them, but the vibration, like with the Icaros in Peru, they put words to them. But it's not about the words, it's about the vibration. The vibration, they say, the Icaros are energetic codes to call in the energy.
Yeah, to carry that.
So each plant that Percy puts in his brew, he puts 12 or so plants in there. There's ayahuasca, there's the chacruna, there's other medicinal plants. Each one he will sing a song to. And when he sings the song, it's not a random song, right? It's the vibrational code of the plant itself. So every human and everything is vibrating a certain vibratory rate. This is old magic. If you know the language, the magical words like abracadabra, things like that, if you know the word, it's not just that it's a random word, it's a certain vibration. And that's why even in the Hebrewic traditions of gematria and of Kabbalah, thank you, it's about everything has a vibration and a numerology and there's a code to it, and you've got to get it exactly correct. If you get the inflection of one little syllable wrong, you've diverted the energy. But these are codes which then invoke the essence of the plants or of the spirits, because everything is vibration and you're calling that vibration into yourself. And that's part of the healing, is that essentially, we don't even need the physical plants or sacraments. We can start to use the vibration.
Just by singing the songs and the Icaros.
To change consciousness.
Yeah.
So what can be illegal? And to their dying, old school, collapsing paradigm of desperation and woe is like, is taking a substance a thing that's illegal, or changing your consciousness? If you meditate for like 20 years to achieve samadhi, or you smoke the toad to get there in 20 seconds, are they both illegal? If you start to use technology potentially to get an EEG, electroencephalography map of what's going on in your brain state when you're on a substance, and then if you could replicate that map and with potentially a transcranial magnetic stimulation Persinger helmet and imprint that onto someone else's brain patterns and they had the experience, is that illegal? I think that the time of illegality is over. It's the time of unification. It's the time of truth. It's the time of revelation I I can't believe this, right? But sometimes in my experiences, I'm going, I think some of the Christian culture is like, this is a time of rapture.
It is.
I mean, I know where I'm going. I know what it sounds like, and I just know I've experienced it, and it's like, what is it? It's a word, right? But when you feel it, it's like I believe it. I believe that these experiences and these embodiments are happening. They're increasing, and they're shifting energy because a planetary healing is happening across the planet because we've almost killed the planet. I mean, does anyone stop? I mean, every day in the news, you see more ecological devastation and increasingly more extreme weather as the planet fights back because it's a closed system. It's trying to get back into equilibrium. If you dig and destroy and take down all the trees, and then everything is connected. Everything is connected. All the indigenous cultures say this. I was just watching the movie Luna, and before that it's like the original documentary was the Kogi tribe and the message from the center of the world, or the prayer of the world. And they say they're the gatekeepers, and they live in the high regions in Ecuador, and they mediate in nature. That the whole tribe, the whole community is shamans. And that's where I think we all need to be going, is that they spend continually each day in unification with nature, praying, living, interacting, and their prayers and their energy help keep balance. And we're out of balance, and we're seeing this across the planet every day, more and more Konosquatsi, world out of balance. And it's not going to get better before it gets worse. And this is why we can't hide from it.
And this is why medicines such as the Bufo alvarius now coming forward, I believe, is because we don't have the luxury of 20 years sitting in a cave, but we can meet with this yogi toad who does spend 9 months of the year in a womb or an earth cave.
Yeah, and it's a relationship. It's beautiful to have a relationship with living beings. Like, I'm all for psychedelic research, and something made in a lab has a place, but the living beings are the us's, and when we engage with them, it's a relationship.
It's organic rather than synthetic.
It's an interspecies relationship of awakening, and that helps embody, our awareness of nature. And we're coming back to nature. It's like good times are just around the corner, really.
And who would have thought that a God particle like that, a God consciousness particle, could be hiding in something as humble as a toad?
Yeah, I mean, they call, basically N,N-dimethyltryptamine is called the spirit molecule. It's like the sort of generic name. And, Western cultures now labeled 5-MeO-DMT, 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine, as the God molecule, because that is what it reveals. But you know what I mean? I must reiterate as well, is that I really believe that these substances are just training wheels, and they're catalysts to help us remember that we have this capacity within us.
Within us, yeah.
N,N-dimethyltryptamine and 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine are both within our brain structure. It's just that we're too busy to flip the on switch. Mystics and saints who go off and meditate and go into caves in the darkness, this is what would happen. And as you say, times are of quite urgency of late. And there is this psychic build-up and this pressure happening in the species that needs to be released and needs to be transformed. And like it or not, we don't have the luxury of time anymore. We really, we're really a powder keg about to go off. And there needs to be the concerted, safe, ethical, mediated release of this energy for transformation of the planet.
So in regards to support from bigger agencies such as the United Nations, when it comes to sacred medicines like this, what sort of infrastructures in place to have it recognised and supported for the purpose of preserving such sacred sacraments?
Well, you've got to remember the United Nations was, formed post-World War II by the victor nations. And yes, it includes all the nation states of the earth, but the governing council and essentially America, can veto and has also implemented drug laws, which, are very damaging for the collective. So there's been exceptions to the rule, like ayahuasca has been declared a national treasure in Peru, second only to Machu Picchu, the holy sort of site. And so it is exempt, it is legal in South America. Most of the indigenous cultures have still retained their sovereignty and their national sovereignty to declare things like coca, which is a sacred substance throughout Peru and Mesoamerica, that can be perverted into cocaine when it's, turned into a drug. And this is the thing, all the shamanic sacred substances originally start off as pure and from the earth, and Westerners, in their need because of their disconnect, take them, tweak them into something more, hybridized or worse, and then turn it into a drug because they don't understand right relationship and the way to engage with them. So the United Nations has exemptions to certain rules around the world for indigenous cultures, but essentially, Western people, because of the legacy of the war on drugs, are still on the short end of the stick and are still fighting for their legal human right to engage in spiritual pursuit of these medicines. And so we see in America the legalization of marijuana and medical marijuana. There's been a few churches, ayahuasca churches, Santa Daime we mentioned, who have a few branches in America, but there's been precedents established, but very regional precedents and very small within their structures. There's the Native American Church in America, which some branches of can invite, people outside Native American culture into to partake of either San Pedro or peyote ceremonies, and potentially some down the track. So there's all of these different potentialities. Dr. Octavio Redig works with a United Nations auspiced organization doing sacred medicines and traveling the world, so they have legal protection to work with these medicines in most countries of the world. But it's an ongoing engagement of people who are in that political arena and in that community arena to continue to work with medical bodies, scientific bodies, legal bodies, to engage governments to show them the great benefit of these substances, and that they are medicinal and that they are healing, and that they need to be respected and protected and not criminalized.
Yeah. I
did just hear that a very well-respected maestro, Don Jose Campos, who's an ayahuasquero from around Pucallpa, who was traveling and was arrested in France recently and is still being incarcerated for working with ayahuasca in France. France did something very sneaky back in around 2005 when it was becoming apparent that ayahuasca was on the increase. Jan Koonen, who is a French Hollywood filmmaker, released a documentary, what's the documentary called? Other Worlds. And I think largely because of him, France became, there was a lot of interest in France of ayahuasca, and there was a motion to try and to become visible, to petition the government for religious freedom of ayahuasca. And then I'm a bit vague on the details, but from memory, something sneaky happened that they said, no, don't do that here. We'll allow you to do this. And then when it got put on the table, they criminalized it instead. Oh. And so it was one of the first Western countries to criminalize ayahuasca, because most countries of the world, because ayahuasca is a deconcoction, which means that you just put one plant and that plant in water and boil them.
Yeah.
So it's not considered a chemical extraction or a drug in that sense. And so it sort of falls through the cracks of the 1971 Psychotropic Drug Convention of drugs, because harmine and harmaline are in many foodstuffs and additives around the world in Western countries. So the chemical in ayahuasca is technically not illegal in most countries. And the DMT in the chacruna plant is, because it's not a chemical extract, it's not illegal either, because we have DMT in our brains. All humans, mammals, all these species do, and the law shouldn't differentiate or be prejudiced against the container which contains. I mean, how can a plant be illegal, or technically we're illegal if they say DMT is illegal in a container in its native form? If you extract it chemically, then they can say it's illegal. So technically, ayahuasca brew is in a grey area of the law where it's not illegal and it's potentially not legal, but it's not illegal in most countries of the world. Many countries, except France, did criminalize it back in 2005, 2006. And so very sad situation that Don Campos is incarcerated in France at this time. Yeah. And we send him our support and our blessings, and maybe we can put a link to this show and people could use a crowdfunding campaign underway to help raise legal funds for him. And cases like that, I think it's pretty stark, I must say. Cases in shamans around the world that have been arrested have pretty much all been released because they found that there wasn't a legal precedent that it was illegal. But France has a very on-the-books law for over a decade now saying ayahuasca is illegal. This traveling shaman was working with ayahuasca, and it's going to bring it all to the fore, and there's going to be a precedent with it. And it may be an unjust law, and maybe this is what is needed for us to overturn this law.
Maybe the test case that we need. Yeah. Just like with Adrian in the UK.
Yeah.
And
Darth here in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, medicine people are still, it's like the legacy of the Spanish Inquisition, they're still persecuted. And so, that is shifting, and I think we all this is part of what's happening with the blossoming of medicine culture becoming more public and more pronounced. It's not just happening in cultures back in South America and Mexico and countries where it's legal. As more and more Westerners travel to those countries from the first wavers and become medicine people themselves or carriers of this sacred medicine, they go back to their communities. Ayahuasca's now grown all over the world in the right conditions. And there's this pollination happening. And so, it's happening all around the world, many different sacraments. And so we're coming into contact with the laws of different countries of the world. And we're becoming more public. And the time of persecution is over, and the time of unification and standing strong. If you can have, gay rights and gay marriage, and blacks and women got the vote, and it's almost as if some commentators have said that people who take plant medicines and psychedelics are one of the last persecuted minorities. And you can't have freedom for some people unless you have freedom for all people. This is the time we're in, and respect the sovereignty and the rights of all peoples of the earth. That is what is needed now.
Yeah. So have a look online for Don Jose Campos's Fighting Fund. We'll put the link up for that. It's good to sit around and talk about this because we've got to look after each other. We are building that global village.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The experience of 5-MeO-DMT and the Todas taught me is that there are no others, right? You say we are the ones we've been waiting for, and we are, right? And we are all petals on a single flower that is blossoming right now, and there's no separation. And divine source makes no distinction between you, me, and all of its creation, because it's all the same energy animating and infusing and blossoming through all its constituent parts. And I feel that, the insects have learned this before, and I think humans as a species are going through this same process of collectivization and of the hive mind. And the technologies like the internet and things like that are teaching us to be a distributed consciousness and to get beyond the individuation of just linear space-time coordination. And we're learning, again, to become a collective and how to mediate and how to engage as a collective and to work together as a collective, so there's less individual ego and more group consciousness.
Yeah.
And when you realize that we are all one, and it's not just a bumper sticker, it's actually a way of living, that changes your whole perspective. And then you don't necessarily always work towards individual ego needs. You work towards the betterment of the collective and the group. And we are the ones we've been looking for. And there are no others. There's just us.
Yeah.
My friend T. Ferry says that we have already won. We are already one.
Aho. And with that, we will see you again next week. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rack. Thank you.
That's what I do.
Gracias. And viva Octavio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So please check out shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. You can stream or download episode 1, and we really do rely on your support. We say it takes a tribe to raise a child. It also takes a tribe to support a documentary and a documentary series. This is potentially a 12-part series, and by purchasing episode 1, we're raising the funds for us to do episode 2 and to continue to travel the world on a very small micro budget with a very small dedicated crew to go through these experiences and to work with these shamanic practitioners, and to then share this with the global tribe.
So thank you again, viewers, and we'll see you again next week, same time. We are the ones who've been waiting for. Thank you.
I hope.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.